Imagine a standard building brick. You know the size. Now imagine walking up to that brick, reaching down to casually pick it up, and suddenly realizing you can't. Because that single ordinary size block doesn't weigh 5 pounds. It weighs almost 30 pounds.
Right, it's shockingly heavy.
Hello, and welcome to Sleepcast, probably the most boring podcast in the world. I'm so glad you could join us. Tonight, we are going to take a very relaxing, very slow journey. We're going to travel all the way from the molten, superheated depths of the Earth's crust, slowly making our way up to the surface, and eventually drifting into the heavily guarded, perfectly quiet vaults of Fort Knox. We are going to talk about gold.
That's right, just a nice heavy yellow rock.
We have a couple of primary sources to guide us on this tranquil journey tonight. We're looking at a deeply comprehensive geological survey from the U.S. Geological Survey, alongside some historical records from the World Gold Council. And honestly, okay, I know this is Sleepcast, and I know we are supposed to be keeping things extremely mellow, but I have to admit my heart is actually beating a little faster right now.
It's hard not to get excited about it.
It really is. I am so incredibly excited to take a deep dive into these sources. Because what starts as a simple, silent geological process deep underground, it completely shaped the Earth, rewrote human history, and dictated the entire global economy. So, wherever you are listening right now, I want you to get comfortable, sink into your seat, and prepare to fundamentally change how you view the jewelry you wear or the money sitting in your bank account.
It really is a profound story when you look at the mechanics of it all. Because long before human beings could hoard it or, fight over it or build vast, complex financial empires around it, the Earth actually had to forge it. And that process starts incredibly deep underground.
Right, because you don't just find gold sitting everywhere.
No, exactly. It is relatively scarce.
Yeah.
But the Earth has these phenomenal geologic processes that gather it up and concentrate it into two main types of deposits. You have lode deposits, which are the primary source, and placer deposits, which are secondary.
Okay, so we should probably start with the lode deposits, right? Because this is where the actual genesis happens. This is the origin story.
Yes, the very beginning.
And the sources say it's taking place roughly 2 to 5 miles down under the Earth's crust in an environment that is intensely hostile to life.
Exactly. Geologists have a few hypotheses for exactly how these lode deposits form, but one of the most widely accepted and heavily documented models involves circulating groundwaters driven by the immense heat from magma.
Oh, wow. 2 to 5 miles down, you've got groundwater.
You do, yeah.
Yeah.
You can actually look at active geothermal systems today as a modern analog for what happened millions of years ago. Essentially, you have rainfall moving downward through tiny fractures and permeable beds in the cooler upper parts of the crust. And then over time, this water gets drawn laterally into areas that are being heated by deep molten magma chambers.
So the water gets superheated under massive pressure.
Precisely. And as it gets heated, it becomes incredibly aggressive chemically. It is driven forcefully back upward through faults and fractures in the rock. As this superheated water travels, it acts as a solvent. It basically dissolves trace metals, including gold, right out of the surrounding rocks.
Okay, let me make sure I'm visualizing this correctly. Let's unpack this. The Earth is essentially acting like a giant, high-pressure espresso machine.
An espresso machine.
Yeah, you've got this hot water percolating up through the grounds, but instead of extracting caffeine, it is extracting and dissolving gold at a molecular level from miles of solid rock.
I actually love that analogy. Yes, it's a massive natural geothermal extraction process. But here is the critical part of the mechanism. Water can only hold those dissolved metals under specific conditions. When that superheated, mineral-rich fluid finally gets pushed high enough that it hits cooler rocks closer to the surface, the temperature and pressure suddenly drop.
And it can't hold the gold in solution anymore.
Exactly. The fluid essentially dumps its payload. The gold precipitates out of the water and crystallizes into veins, often alongside quartz.
That makes perfect sense.
And there are other hypotheses the sources mentioned too. Like, one suggests that as the magma itself cools, it directly expels gold-bearing chemical solutions into the surrounding cooler rocks, which we often see near large granitic rock masses.
Oh, so the magma itself is sweating out the gold.
Yeah, that's one way to look at it. Another hypothesis focuses on mountain building at continental margins. When tectonic plates collide, the intense heat and pressure cause metamorphism. They physically alter the rock structures, squeezing out water that carries gold upward.
But the through line here is always heat, pressure, and fluid dynamics.
That's right. And what's fascinating here is that gold isn't just scattered capriciously by magic or luck. Its presence in the earth follows strict, observable natural laws.
It's all just geology.
Exactly. Understanding these geothermal systems, mapping the rock structures, the ancient faults, and the deep fractures is exactly how modern geologists know where to look for it today. They aren't just guessing. They are reading the scars of these ancient thermal events.
But that brings up a really obvious problem. I mean, if the Earth's espresso machine traps all this gold in solid rock veins miles underground, how did ancient humans ever find it? Which I assume brings us to the second type of deposit placer deposits, because nature doesn't just stop once the vein is formed. Eventually, erosion takes over.
Yes, the slow, unstoppable force of geology. Over millions of years, mountains are uplifted, and weather goes to work. Wind, rain, ice, and rivers physically wear away the host rock, covering these lode veins. Rock meets water, the rock disintegrates, and the gold is finally freed into the elements.
And this is where the chemistry of gold becomes the star of the show, because the sources point out that gold is a noble metal. That sounds like an old alchemistic term, but it has a very specific chemical meaning, doesn't it? It means gold does not oxidize under ordinary conditions. It doesn't react.
That's the crucial mechanism. Think about iron. If iron is exposed to water and oxygen, it rusts. It degrades and falls apart. Copper turns green and corrodes. Silver tarnishes. But gold?
It just sits there.
Exactly. Gold is virtually inert. It is extremely resistant to chemical weathering. So as the host rock around it completely disintegrates into mud and sand, the gold survives the journey perfectly intact. It washes downstream as dust, flakes, grains, or nuggets, completely unchanged from the moment it crystallized.
And it sinks. It sinks immediately to the bottom of whatever river or stream it ends up in, because pure gold is unbelievably dense. The sources emphasize specific gravity to explain this. The specific gravity of pure gold is 19.3.
Which is incredibly high.
Right. To put that in perspective for you, think about lead. We all think of lead as incredibly heavy, but lead's specific gravity is only 11.4. And the ordinary waste rock, what geologists call gangue, that gold usually sits in, that has a specific gravity of just about 2.5.
That massive difference in density is the entire key to human history with gold. When gold particles move downstream during high water periods, they don't just float along with the silt. They plunge downward through the agitated sand and gravel.
Because it's so much heavier than everything else.
Right. They collect in depressions, in the bedrock, or in pockets where the stream current slackens. These heavy concentrations are called pay streaks. Prospectors learn to look for these streaks along with black sands, which are heavy minerals like magnetite or chromite that settle right alongside the gold because they are also exceptionally dense.
You know, here's where it gets really interesting to me. We have this historical romanticism about mining. We picture the 1849 California gold rush or those earlier U.S. discoveries in the southern Appalachians around 1792. We picture these complex, gritty, industrial feats of engineering. But basically, they were just taking advantage of the fact that gold is incredibly heavy, right?
It really is just the sheer physics of it.
Yeah, they used simple gravity-based devices, gold pans, rockers, sluice boxes. The mechanism is almost hilariously simple. You just dig up the dirt, agitate it in water, the 2.5 density dirt washes away in the current, and the 19.3 density gold stubbornly stays at the bottom.
Exactly. Because gold is so remarkably heavy, and yet so physically soft pure gold has about the hardness of a penny, making it the most malleable and ductile of all metals. It required almost zero technological advancement to extract and mold.
Wow, just the hardness of a penny.
Yeah, so that is exactly why it was among the very first metals mined by ancient civilizations. You didn't need blast furnaces to smelt it out of complex ores. You just needed a river and gravity.
Which is why we see it everywhere in the ancient world. Over 5,000 years ago, the Egyptian pharaohs were using gold lavishly. The World Gold Council sources mention the tomb of the young pharaoh Tutankhamun, discovered by Howard Carter and Lord Carnarvon in 1922. King Tut ruled in the 14th century BC, and his tomb was packed with exquisite gold items.
It's incredible how well it holds up.
It is. When those treasures toured the United States in the late 1970s, they attracted more than 6 million visitors. Or look at the Citadel of Mycenae in Greece, where they found gold masks created more than 3,500 years ago. Humanity has just always had gold fever.
We definitely have. But panning in rivers only gets you so far. Once all the easy, loose placer gold is scooped out of the rivers, you have to go back to the source. You have to go after the lode deposits embedded in solid rock.
The espresso machine.
Exactly. And that requires chemistry. The sources detail a few major technological leaps here. First was amalgamation. Miners realized that mercury has a unique chemical affinity for gold.
Right, but how does that actually work? They just pour mercury on rocks.
Essentially, yes. When crushed gold-bearing ore is mixed with mercury, the mercury binds physically with the gold particles, forming what's called an amalgam. It separates the gold from the useless quartz.
Okay, but then you have a lump of mercury and gold. That doesn't seem super useful.
True. To get the pure gold, they used a process called retorting. You heat the amalgam in a sealed vessel. Mercury has a much lower boiling point than gold, so the mercury vaporizes into a gas, travels down a cooling tube, and condenses back into liquid mercury to be reused, leaving the pure gold behind.
That sounds incredibly dangerous considering what we now know about mercury vapor.
Oh, it was extremely dangerous. But later, for really low-grade ore, where the gold particles are literally microscopic, they developed the cyanide process. And this is a marvel of chemistry.
Cyanide.
No.
Also sounds dangerous.
Very. A weak solution of sodium or potassium cyanide is sprayed over crushed ore. In the presence of oxygen, the cyanide molecules actually bind to the gold atoms at a molecular level, pulling them out of the solid crystal lattice of the rock and into a water-soluble complex.
Wait, so the gold literally dissolves into a liquid?
Yes. The liquid is collected and then zinc dust is added, which forces the gold to precipitate back out as a solid. That specific technology is what drives massive modern operations today.
That's wild. The sources also mention something called porphyry deposits, like the one at Bingham Canyon in Utah. I had to look this up because it wasn't immediately clear. A porphyry deposit is a massive low-grade ore body. The one in Utah is primarily mined for copper, but because they are processing such an unimaginably huge volume of rock using these chemical methods, the tiny trace amounts of gold really add up.
They absolutely do.
Bingham Canyon has recovered about 18 million troy ounces of gold since 1906, just as a byproduct of copper mining.
And when you look at the total output of human extraction, it's staggering. From 1792 to 1989, the U.S. alone produced 363 million ounces. Worldwide, an estimated 3.4 billion troy ounces have been produced, with about 45% of that coming from just one place, the Witwatersrand district in South Africa.
But here's where we have to pivot. Here's where the story gets monumental. Because gold was practically imperishable, because it was mathematically easy to extract via density, and because it was beautiful, humanity took this aesthetic obsession and we evolved it.
We certainly did.
We took this incredibly heavy rock, pulled from the crust of the earth, and we made it the absolute anchor for the modern global economy. We transitioned into the era of the classical gold standard.
This is a profound shift. Under the classical gold standard, nearly all participating countries did something radical. They legally fixed the value of their domestic paper currencies to a specified amount of physical gold.
Okay, let's explore how that actually worked in practice for a person on the street. There was free convertibility, right?
Exactly. There were no restrictions on importing or exporting gold. Gold coins circulated right alongside paper notes. And because every participating nation's currency was fixed to a specific weight of gold, the exchange rates between those nations were mathematically fixed too. It was an automatic system.
So if I'm a merchant in New York buying goods from London, I don't have to worry about the exchange rate fluctuating wildly overnight.
Right. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the classical gold standard created immense stability for international trade. But, and this is a massive but, it was highly rigid. It completely stripped governments of economic flexibility.
How so?
Think about the mechanism of trade. If a country imported more goods than it exported, it had to pay the difference in actual physical gold. That gold physically left the country.
Oh, wow.
Because their paper money supply was legally tied to the gold in their vaults, losing gold meant they had to shrink their money supply. Less money meant deflation prices and wages fell. It was an automatic rebalancing act, but it meant governments couldn't just print more money to stimulate their economy during a recession or fund a crisis. Your monetary policy was strictly physically limited by the shiny rocks in your vaults.
And let's talk about those vaults, because I think it's easy to treat this as an abstract economic concept, but it is intensely physical. A huge portion of the United States gold stock is sitting right now in the Fort Knox Bullion Depository in Kentucky.
Yes, the legendary Fort Knox.
And the USGS source gives us the exact dimensions of what is in there. The gold is stored unwrapped, just sitting in dark vault compartments. There are bars about the size of an ordinary building brick, 7 inches long, 3 58 inches wide, and 1 34 inches thick.
Very specific.
But remember that specific gravity of 19.3 we talked about. Because of that density, each one of those little bricks weighs about 27.5 pounds. That's 400 troy ounces per brick. Imagine your wallet right now. Look at the paper bills in it. Under the classical gold standard, every piece of paper money you held was literally just a coupon, a paper claim ticket for a microscopic sliver of a 27-pound brick sitting silently in a vault in Kentucky.
It's a fascinating way to conceptualize it. But that intense rigidity you just described, the fact that money was tied to physical bricks, became a massive problem when the world descended into the chaos of the interwar period and eventually the Second World War.
Right, because you can't just spawn gold out of thin air to fund a global war.
Exactly. By the time WWII was winding down, Europe was economically devastated. It was clear the old traditional gold standard couldn't survive the massive rebuilding efforts required. Governments desperately needed more flexibility to manage their economies than the physical metal allowed. This necessitated a total redesign of global money.
Enter the Bretton Woods Conference in 1944.
Yes. Representatives from 44 nations met in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire to design a new monetary system. Because the United States held the vast majority of the world's gold reserves at the end of the war and had an intact industrial base, this new system was centered entirely around the U.S. dollar. Under Bretton Woods, the dollar was fixed to gold at a parity of $35 per troy ounce.
Wait, I'm stuck on something here. If the U.S. dollar was tied to gold, what did the rest of the world do? Didn't this give the U.S. a terrifying amount of power over global trade?
It absolutely did. The rest of the countries didn't peg their money directly to gold anymore. They gave their currencies fixed but adjustable exchange rates to the U.S. dollar. So the dollar was tethered to the gold, and everyone else was tethered to the dollar. But the trade-off was that this new system permitted something called capital controls.
What exactly is a capital control in this context?
It's a mechanism to restrict the flow of money in and out of a country. Under the old system, if a government lowered interest rates to stimulate job growth, investors would immediately pull their money out and move it to a country with higher interest rates. Capital controls prevented that. It gave governments the breathing room to manage their domestic economies and stimulate growth without immediately suffering severe penalties in the global financial markets.
Oh, I see. But even that hybrid system, the Bretton Woods system, it couldn't last forever. In 1971, the U.S. abruptly ended the dollar's convertibility to gold.
Yes, the infamous Nixon shock.
But why? Did the U.S. just, run out of gold?
Not entirely, but they were running out of enough gold to back the amount of paper money they had printed. Throughout the 1960s, the U.S. was spending heavily on the Vietnam War and domestic social programs, flooding the world with dollars. Foreign nations started getting nervous about U.S. inflation.
They realized the math wasn't mathing.
Right. They realized there were far more dollars circulating globally than there was gold in Fort Knox at $35 an ounce. So foreign central banks started calling their bluffs. They started demanding physical gold in exchange for their paper dollars.
A run on the bank, a global run on Fort Knox.
Exactly. To prevent the complete depletion of U.S. gold reserves, President Richard Nixon was forced to unilaterally suspend the convertibility of the dollar into gold in 1971. He severed the tether.
And the market reaction was explosive. The price of gold was suddenly deregulated, and it went absolutely crazy. It shot up, briefly reaching more than $800 a troy ounce in 1980.
Which was unprecedented.
Now, that massive price spike actually caused gold consumption for things like jewelry to drop sharply. But it had the exact opposite effect on the mining industry. It triggered a whole new wave of modern gold rushes. Experienced geologists and amateur prospectors rushed back into the field. New mines opened up all through the 1980s. U.S. mine production, which had been languishing under 2 million ounces annually for decades, skyrocketed to about 9 million troy ounces per year by 1990.
It completely revitalized the industry.
So what does this all mean? When Nixon closed the gold window in 1971, does that essentially mark the exact moment humanity collectively decided to break our physical tether to the earth? Did we just all agree to hallucinate the value of our money based purely on trust?
I wouldn't necessarily call it hallucinating. I'd argue it's actually a highly sophisticated shift in trust. This raises an important question about the fundamental psychology of modern economics. We didn't stop trusting value. We just shifted our trust away from a heavy metal forged in a geothermal vent and placed it instead onto the economic output and political stability of sovereign governments. Fiat currency relies on faith in human systems.
Right. We trust the government more than the rock.
Well, ideally. But you are right about the impact on gold itself. Once gold was no longer officially money acting as the rigid backing for the world's currency, it reverted to being a highly prized commodity. Its perceived value was no longer mandated by a government decree at $35 an ounce. It was suddenly subject to the massive, unpredictable price swings of the open market.
Because it's just a thing you can buy and sell again.
Exactly. It eventually stabilized later in the 1980s, around $320 to $460 an ounce, but it completely changed the global mining industry forever. We successfully divorced our daily economic transactions from the slow, physical, geological processes of the Earth.
It's incredible to think about. We took this element that requires a magma chamber to create and rivers to uncover, and we used it to bootstrap our way into a modern global economy, only to leave it behind in the vaults once the economy outgrew it.
And if you want a final thought on how the perceived value of gold has shaped and sometimes warped human behavior, look back at the historical records regarding the Aztec and Inca treasuries of Mexico and Peru. The sources note that much of their magnificent gold is believed to have originally come from Colombia.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was masterfully crafted over generations into priceless, irreplaceable artifacts of indigenous culture and religion. And when the conquistadors plundered those civilizations during their explorations of the New World, they didn't see the cultural value. They didn't see the art or the history. They just saw the raw density of the metal. They melted those priceless ancient artifacts down just to cast them into crude, transportable coins and bars.
They erased the culture to extract the commodity. Which leaves us with something fascinating to ponder as you drift off to sleep tonight. When you picture those unwrapped 27.5-pound building bricks of pure gold sitting silently in the dark, perfectly still vaults of Fort Knox, imagine a future civilization uncovering them thousands of years from now. Will they look at those mathematically perfect bricks and see the practical, rational economic reserves of an advanced society? Or will they look at our heavily girded vaults and just see another iteration of an ancient tomb packed floor to ceiling with shiny yellow rocks that we were irrationally obsessed with? Thank you for spending this quiet time with us. We hope you found this journey relaxing and perhaps a little illuminating. I invite you to return soon, get comfortable, and join us for another incredibly calm, incredibly soothing deep dive into Sleepcast. Good night.